Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sat means truth, logos means study of science, Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means a science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. So at Sattology, we keep bringing these interesting topics for you to think about. We don't try to endorse a particular view just to retain impartiality, because the truth is seen by multiple people from multiple sides, and therefore we purposely keep it that way. And if you ask my views are just linked to Bhagavad Gita, because I believe that's the ultimate Sattology book, and I've written two translations on it: the Hindu Bible and the Gita. And if anyone falls in that logic, then it is the truth, it is Sattology. Anything outside is mythology. That means all the Western philosophers, Western academics, and the Western ideologists are all mythologists, because they don't have the truth which is verified by Bhagavad Gita. So without delay, I have a very, very special guest, a scientist, and he has done a fabulous work on this area. So without delay, let us welcome Dr. Raja Ram Mohan Roy.
Thank you, Aditya.
Namaskar. So you are an IITian.
Yes, IIT Kanpur.
Indian Institute of Technology. And Karnapur. So it is
Yes.
a very ancient town in India. And I think it brings that kind of adhyatma also, because there's a nature of that town. And you are from Bengal, so which is known for good public speakers, right?
Yes, actually, I'm from Bihar.
Bihar.
Yeah.
But Bihar is known for rulers, kings.
Yeah, yes, and also Adhyatma, Jainism,
Adhyatma,
Buddhism,
everything.
Hinduism.
In fact, in Mahabharata, it is mentioned that future king of the world will come from Magad. So,
Yes, Bihar has played a big role in the history of India.
history of the world.
Yes,
Magad,
I mean,
Magad, the kings of Magad will be the future rulers of the entire world, not just India, entire world. Now, when you talk about all the conflicts today raging, and our today's discussion is also on a person who is mythologically ascribed to conquering, and and the Greek versions of the history. Anyway, so in today's conflict, what is your view? Like, my thought process was that if yoga is made compulsory in Europe and trained all the European leaders or the European origin American leaders, then most of the conflicts in the world will stop, because they always it's a very selfish habit of seeing only their benefit, as if the rest of the world is still a colony. So what is your view on that?
Aditya, this is a very sad situation. I mean, this is, I think, the first time in my life that I am like we are kind of witnessing a war, and the wars are very devastating. So I just hope that the things should not have come to this situation. And the conflicts are basically, I mean, even if they are between the nations, ultimately they are like between the people, like what they stand for. And the conflicts that, I mean, there were warning signs from before. And I mean, there are concerns from obviously from the Russia side. And those concerns, I mean, they have been quite vocal about it. It was very well known, and they have not been heeded. And this has come to a very unfortunate situation that could have been avoided. I mean, many times you don't really need to be in one side or the other. If I guess Ukraine had decided to stay neutral, things would not have come to this situation.
No, I would like to correct you. You have seen a lot of wars. You have seen 91, you have seen Gulf War 1, Gulf War 2, Afghanistan. You've seen a lot of, our generation has seen so many wars.
Right, right. Yes, I had
Syria.
kind of forgotten about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
everywhere. We have seen so many wars. We have seen the breakup of United USSR. We have seen a lot of wars. I mean, the wars have never stopped ever since we were born.
yes, in that way, the wars are basically not just, I mean, they are ideological wars, right? I mean, it's
Physical, I'm saying, bombings,
yeah,
physical bombings
yeah,
in Syria, Iraq, like almost like we have seen 6 to 8 million innocents getting killed by the West, also by the US.
Yeah, what I mean that the wars are manifestation of ultimately the war of ideologies.
Yeah,
So actually, I mean, the people are dying, but this is because one ideology is trying to defeat another ideology. I mean, that's how it has happened all through the history. It's the
that's right.
one ideology trying to show that we are the right ideology, everybody else is wrong, and everybody else has to just fall in line.
And ultimately, like the Gita mentions, that everything is for Artha Sanchayan. At the end of the day, in the 16th chapter, everything is for economic benefit. I think
Yes,
like Gita is proving right even today, every day. Like,
that is the beauty of our civilization. Our wisdom is forever. I mean, what applied then, what applied now. I mean, the technology has changed. Our environmental, I mean, technological environment has changed, but our minds have not changed. I mean, the human mind at the still is behaving the same way it behaved 5,000 years ago.
just a hypothetical question to you, not to put you on a spot. If we make Bhagavad Gita compulsory for all the, especially the Europeans and the European origin people, because they have created maximum wars and compulsory, will the war stop?
Well, the Bhagavad Gita itself is the testimony that you cannot stop the war because we had the war right after Bhagavad Gita. So ultimately, what Bhagavad Gita is saying that you have to fight the war for the righteous to prevail, right?
Good
You
answer.
cannot just take on the continue to bow down to the evil, right? So ultimately, for the greater good, you have to fight. I mean, the fight is at multiple levels. It's not just a like a war. I mean, you always fight it just within yourself, right? I mean, to do the right thing.
A great point. And I think today we are debunking Sandrokottos' story. So you can start the presentation as soon as you're ready. And while you're doing that, I'll tell the audience that Bhagavad Gita, very good answer, because we have to be on the side of dharma or adharma, and which dharma explanation is very clear in Bhagavad Gita. So we cannot stop wars, but at least the war should be for the greater good of people. Loka sangraha.
Absolutely. I mean, it has to be the last recourse, right?
Yeah.
Lord Krishna tried all he could to avoid the war, but Duryodhana was not willing to give even 5 villages. He was not willing to give even the land that will stand on the what a needle.
No, no. While you share the presentation, so I'll say who's Duryodhan in today's war.
Okay, I'll start sharing. Thanks, Aditya.
Who is Duryodhan? We have to find out, and then we'll know which side is the dharma and which side is dharma. So the conditions you all have to see the truthful. You can start sharing actually.
Okay.
So, but I'll
Can you see it now, Aditya?
yes, we can see it now.
Okay, so I'll make it full screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Aditya. And that today's topic is on the first sea tanker of Indian history. In the last two parts, we have been discussing what are those sea tankers and what are the consequences of having the wrong sea tankers. So now in this talk, I will go into details of what is the evidence for the first sea tanker. And so the first sea tanker is about the identification of Sandrokottos from the Greek accounts with Chandragupt Maurya. But there is another candidate for identification with Sandrokottos, and that is the Chandragupt I, the founder of Imperial Gupta dynasty. And in this talk, I'll uh, go into the details of whether the evidence is in support of one or the another. So the background that we have discussed in the last two talks is that the ancient Indian history has been constructed by going backward and forward from the two seat anchors of Indian history. And this synchronizes Indian history with Greek history. And this picture shows you that the first seat anchor is the meeting of Alexander with Sandrokottos around 326 BCE. And Sandrokottos is identified with Chandragupt Maurya. And the second seat anchor is the identification of Devanam Priya Priyadarshi with Ashok Maurya, and that's around 258 BC. Then the rest of the Indian chronology is constructed by counting backward and forward from these two seat anchors. So today we'll go into the details of the first seat anchor. And I have titled it Sandrokottos versus Sandrokottos. So who was the Sandrokottos? Was it Chandragupt Maurya or Chandragupt I? So it's Chandragupt versus Chandragupt. Who was the real Chandragupt of the Greek accounts? So going into the background, it was in 1793 that Sandrokottos was identified with Chandragupt Maurya by Sir William Jones. And this is one of his quotes in which he describes this identification. And he says that no other than that very Sandrokottos who concluded a treaty with Seleucus Nicator. So he makes Chandragupt Maurya a contemporary of Alexander and Seleucus. And this was a very important discovery. And you can see that in this quote by J.W. McCrindle. Now, McCrindle has written many books that describe what is India in the Greek accounts. And I'll go through his books in the coming talks. And he says the discovery that the Sandrokottos of the Greeks was identical with the Chandragupt who figures in the Sanskrit annals and the Sanskrit drama was one of the great moments, as it was the means of connecting Greek with Sanskrit literature and of thereby supplying for the first time a date to early Indian history, which had not a single chronological landmark of its own. So this is the first time they were able to connect Indian history with Greek history, and it was of great significance. So now going into the Greek accounts, the Chandragupt has been called by various names. So they have got a little bit of a spelling differences, you can say. Sandrokottos by Strabo, Sandrokottos by Pliny, Androkottos by Plutarch, and Sandrokottos by Justin. So these are the different authors, you can say, of the classical Greek time. So after the invasion of Alexander, Strabo, Pliny, Plutarch, Justin, these are the people who have given us information about India. So we have Chandragupt Maurya, who is the founder of the Mauryan dynasty, and he has been identified with Sandrokottos. But there is another Chandragupt, and he also founded a dynasty, a very important dynasty, Imperial Gupta dynasty. And both of these dynasties are very important for Indian history, and they are separated currently by about 650 years. So what we have is that in the currently accepted chronology, Chandragupt I of the Gupta dynasty is more than 6 centuries after Alexander's invasion. And Indian source, but at the same time, the Indian sources place Chandragupt Maurya over 12 centuries before Alexander's invasion. So according to our traditional history, I mean, that's the history that people of India believed before the arrival of British, that the Chandragupt Maurya's time was much earlier, over, let's say, much before 1500 BCE, according to the Indian count. So let's see what are the sources? What do they say? Is there any clinching evidence in favor of Chandragupt Maurya being the Sandrokottos of the Greek accounts? So we see the first evidence is who was the predecessor of Sandrokottos? Who was ruling India before Sandrokottos? And here we have one quote by Greek classical writer Diodorus, and you can read it here. And I'll probably not read all of it, but just see that he says that beyond this again were situated the dominions of the nation of the Prasai and Gandharidai. So these are again need to be identified what these regions are, and whose king Zandremus had an army of 20,000 horses, 200,000 infantry, 2,000 chariots, and 4,000 elephants. So he had a huge army, and his name is given as Zandremus. So this is the person who was ruling India before Sandrokottos. And another quote here from Greek classical writer Curtius, and he says that the further bank of which was inhabited by two nations, the Gangaridai and Prasai, so the same two, just little bit variation in spelling, whose king Agremus kept in the field for guarding the approaches to his country, 20,000 cavalry, 200,000 infantry, and besides 2,000 chariots and all, and elephants that number up to 3,000. So a huge army, but the king's name here is given as Agrimas. So there's a variation between Xandramus and Agrimas. So these Xandramus and Agrimas, they have been, he has been identified by modern historians as the last ruler of the Nanda dynasty, because we know that before the Mauryans, Nanda dynasty was ruling, and Chandragupt Maurya captured the rule with the support of Chanakya. But what we see that this is just an identification based upon that identification of Sandrokottos with Chandragupt Maurya. Like this, they're not so really, because they're not saying Nanda, they are saying Xandramus or Agrimas. So obviously, and this is quite different than what it should be. So you can see that the Greek sources for the predecessor does not support that Nandas were ruling India when Alexander invaded. Now we go to the successor who was ruling after Sandrokottos. And here the Greek classical writers, they tell you that the successor of Sandrokottos, the person ruling after Sandrokottos, they name him Amitrochatus or Elitrochatus. So again, a little bit of spelling difference. Strabo says both of these men were sent as ambassadors to Palimbothra, and which is like Patliputra. Megasthenes to Sandrokottos and Dimachus to Elitrochatus, his son. So he's saying the son of Sandrokottos was Elitrochatus. But we know that the son of Chandragupt Maurya was Bindusar. So the name does not match. And he continues. So now the Nanda dynasty, this is by Macrindle. And Macrindle says about this, that the Nanda dynasty was supplanted by the Mauryans in 315 BC. And Nanda dynasty itself had succeeded to Shishunag in 370 BC. Its last member, whom the Greeks call Xandramus and Curtius calls Agrimas, is variously named in native writings as Dhannand, Nand Mahapadma, and Hiranyagupt. Xandramus, of which Agrimas seems to be a distorted form, transliterates into Chandramas, moon god. So basically, what we have is that Greeks are calling the name is Xandramus, which is like Chandramas. But the Indian sources are saying the ruler was Dhannand or Mahapadmanand. But Dhannand and Mahapadmanand, you can see that they do not match with Chandramas. So clearly, the evidence does not support the identification of Sandrokottos with Chandragupt Maurya. And he continues and he says that Chandragupt was succeeded by his son Bindusar, who is called by Strabo Elitrochatus and by Athenios Amitrochatus. So, but this is just an identification based upon the very first identification of Sandrokottos as Chandragupt Maurya. And so now they are saying that the Bindusar was called Amitrochatus. And he then says that the Amitrochatus, the equivalent word in Sanskrit is Amitraghat. And he says that it was frequently, he was frequently designated, which means enemy slayer. So Macrindle is saying that Bindusar was frequently designated as Amitraghat. But do we have any evidence of that? So we have that the Elitrochatus and Amitrochatus do not match Bindusar. And but the history books say that Bindusar used the title Amitraghat. And I searched for it, and there is basically, if you search for it, there is only one reference comes up, and that is in the book by Upinder Singh, History of Ancient and Early Medieval India. And it says that it is claimed that Mahabhas, it claims that Mahabhas refers to Chandragupt's successor as Amitraghat. But what does Mahabhas say? And here, if you go more into the details, and I give you a link here from an article in Puratattva journal, that the evidence is not clear. The Strabo, and here it says, Strabo mentions Elitrochatus as the son and successor of Sandrokottos. And Athenius calls Amitrochatus, which is in Sanskrit will be Amitraghat. Mahabhasya of Patanjali mentions Amitraghat, however, does not give any further details or his relationship with Chandragupt. So clearly the Mahabhasya is not saying that Bindusar had the title of Amitraghat. So we have all of these circumstantial things that are given as proof, and we go into the details and we see that it is not so. So there is nothing conclusive about the identification of Sandrokottos with Chandragupt Maurya. In fact, if you look at it, and this is by late Dr. K.D. Setna. He wrote multiple books on ancient Indian history. This is he writes in that book Ancient India in a New Light, and I'm uh, very impressed by his work, and I consider my work as kind of a follow-up of the work that Dr. Setna did. So a lot of inspiration and information that I have used in constructing the chronology, I have got great help from the books by Dr. Setna. And then he says that Samudragupt, who is the son of was the son of Chandragupt I, he had a title called Sarv Rajocheta. So now you can think of Amitrochetas, which will mean, or Mitra means not friend, and that means enemy. And so Amitrocheta means the slayer of the enemy. And here we have Samudragupt using a title. I mean, we know that it is used by Samudragupt's successors. It's called Sarv Rajocheta. So he is the eliminator, slayer of all the other kings. But suppose that if he had to describe this title to the Greeks, and obviously he had not eliminated them because he entered into a marriage alliance with them, then instead of calling himself as Sarv Rajocheta, he will call himself Amitrocheta, that he is a slayer of those who are not friendly with him. So there we have some, you can say that evidence in favor of Chandragupt I as being the Sandrokottos. Now we go to the other pieces of evidence. So about the family name, and here we have about the family name of Sandrokottos. The king, this is by Strabo, the king, in addition to his family name, must adopt the surname of Palibotros as Sandrokottos. For instance, did to whom Megasthenes was sent on an embassy. So we know that Megasthenes was sent as an ambassador to Sandrokottos. And it is being said that the king, the Sandrokottos, they adapt the family name in their name itself. So now again, we don't know what exactly they meant by the surname of Palibotros. But if you look at it, I mean, Sandrokottos will be Chandragupt. And for Chandragupt I, we just have Chandragupt I. We don't have any further title like the Chandragupt Maurya, where the family name is Maurya. And if you look at all the imperial Gupta kings, their names are Sri Gupt, Ghatotkach Gupt, and which is followed by, so they were the kind of building the empire, the beginning kings, not emperors. Then Chandragupt I, who became an emperor, and then followed by his son Samudragupt, his son Chandragupt II, his son Kumargupt, and after Kumargupt, briefly, I think is Purugupt, so then his brother Skandagupt, and then he was followed by the son of Purugupt, Budgupt. So all of them have there in their name itself what you could consider a title or a family name, Gupta. So this evidence again supports Chandragupt I being the Sandrokottos. Now here we come to the marriage alliance, the next evidence. And this you have seen in a lot of serials about Chandragupt Maurya and Chanakya about the marriage with the daughter of Sandrokottos. So currently we are taught that Chandragupt Maurya married the daughter of Seleucus Nicator after he defeated him. So he says that the Indus runs in a parallel course along the breadth of these regions. The Indians possess partly some of the countries lying along Indus, but these belonged formerly to the Persians. Alexander took them away from the Arionai and established in them colonies of his own. And there is the most important line. Seleucus Nicator gave them to Sandrokottos in concluding a marriage alliance and received in exchange 500 elephants. So basically, Seleucus was defeated by Sandrokottos, and that resulted in a marriage alliance. But he did not say that the Seleucus Nicator gave his daughter to the daughter of Seleucus Nicator was married to Sandrokottos. He just said that there was a marriage alliance, and then he received 500 elephants as a gift. And those 500 elephants, they proved very important for Seleucus Nicator because he used them to defeat his rivals. So now we have the claim that Chandragupt Maurya married the daughter of Seleucus Nicator, but there is no evidence. It just says there was a marriage alliance. But if you look at from the imperial Gupta dynasty, the son of Chandragupt was Samudragupt, and he was married to Datta Devi, and that we have in the inscriptions. And he says if you look at the name Datta Devi, the first name is Datt, and that means given. And the second part, Devi, is simply an honorable name. So we can see that the Datta Devi was the name given after marriage. And Samudragupt claims that he has earned her using his prowess in the Iran stone inscription. And this is the inscription of Samudragupt, about Samudragupt by his successors. And he said that there was married a virtuous and faithful wife whose dower was provided by his manliness and prowess. So basically, what we have is that this wife, Samudragupt had married, was because of the win in the war. So that will make a perfect sense, will match well with the defeat of Seleucus Nicator. And if you think of that, then that Seleucus was defeated by Chandragupt I and his son Samudragupt, then Chandragupt I will be like a middle-aged man, because in 326 BC already he had met Alexander, and the war with Seleucus happened some 22 years later, around 304 BCE. So at that time, Samudragupt will be the man who will be of a marriageable age. So it will be, we can see that it will be Samudragupt who will be married to the daughter of Seleucus instead of Chandragupt I. So we see that we have another evidence that supports Chandragupt I being Sandrokottos. Now we go to the mentor. And so we know that the Chandragupt Maurya was installed as the ruler of Magad by Chanakya. I mean, we know that the Chanakya has played such a role in making Chandragupt Maurya the ruler, the emperor. And he served him as the prime minister. And not only him, but to his son Bindusar, and also to Ashoka. We have evidence for that. But there is no mention of Chanakya in the Greek accounts. And that you can see that is a glaring inconsistency, that they will not talk about him at all. Now we come to the coinage. Now the coinage about the Mauryan rulers is that the Mauryan rulers were using what is called punch marked coins. And here is one quote. The coins in circulation during the Mauryan period were known as punch marked coins. And we go further. But the imperial Gupta rulers, they were using gold coins. And these were not known before in India. And so we have the Bactrian group. We have a quote here from Majumdar, that it is the Bactrian Greeks who first introduced coins with names and portraits of the rulers who issued them. The figure of the king on the obverse and of a deity or other symbols on the reverse are executed with a high degree of skill. And it says that the imperial Guptas issued a series of fine gold coins. So we have the Bactrian Greeks issuing gold coins, and we have the imperial Guptas doing that. But the question is, if the Mauryan rulers were contemporary of Bactrian Greek rulers, because these these rulers, their rule was founded in 256 BCE. So why would not Mauryan rulers issue gold coins? Because they are contemporary, they should have come to know about this new technology. But what we have is that not only the Mauryan rulers, long after them, the Sung rulers and the Kan rulers, they also kept using the punch marked coins. And here is a quote to that effect from this book explaining monetary and financial innovation. And it says that Magad issued coinage that may be called India's first national currency. Magad's rule from Patliputra was followed by that of Nand, Maurya, Sung, and Kanb dynasty. And all of these dynasties issued punch marked coins. So we have long after Mauryans, the Sung and Kanb dynasty continue to only make punch marked coins. So that clearly is not in favor of Sandrokottos being Chandragupt Maurya, because if it was so, then the Mauryans, or at least after them, the Sung and Kalb rulers, they should have issued the gold coins. That imperial, but if we have imperial Gupta as their contemporary, then we have a beautiful explanation for that. The next evidence is about a severe famine. And according to Jain sources about Chandragupt Maurya, said that there was a great famine during his rule. And here is a quote from the book Temples of South India. And it says, traditional accounts celebrate the place as the one where Bhadrabahu, known as the last Srut Kevalin and preceptor of a spiritual guru of Emperor Chandragupt Maurya, resorted to leading thousands of lay followers when the country around Patliputra had fallen under severe and prolonged famine condition. So we know that during the time of Chandragupt Maurya himself, there was a huge, severe and prolonged famine. But what do the classical writers, Greek classical writers say? Diodorus, he writes that India had never experienced a famine. It is accordingly affirmed that famine has never visited India, and that there has never been a general scarcity in the supply of nourishing food. So you clearly see, if Indian sources are saying there was a severe great famine right in the time of Chandragupt Maurya, and this is being written right about after Chandragupt Maurya, or soon after that, and they have no idea of any famine. So clearly we have evidence that is against Sandrokottos being Chandragupt Maurya. Now we go to indigenous evidence. We have the list of kings in our Puranas and other texts. And what we have from the Greek writers is that there were 153 kings between Father Bacchus and the Alexander the Great. And these are a couple of quotes here. Again, these are the book by the McCrindle, who has compiled all the information about India from the Greek sources in different books. This is the book called Ancient India as described in classical literature. Here it says, from Father Bacchus down to Alexander, they reckon 153 kings and 6,451 years. And the same quote again. And then we have another quote, again compiled by McCrindle. And this is another book, Ancient India as described by Megasthenes and Arian. And here he says that from the time of Dionysus to Sandrokottos, the Indians counted 153 kings and a period of 6,042 years. So they had been given this information that we see that there are 153 kings that were counted by Indians. Now, Dr. K.D. Setna, that I just talked about earlier, he had tabulated the list of kings. And from in that, he has found that there are 111 kings, starting from Swayambhu Manu to Chandragupt Maurya. But if you count from Swayambhu Manu to Chandragupt I, then we get 146 kings. So we now again the exact identification of who was Father Bacchus or who was Dionysus, what who Greeks had in mind. But clearly you can see that from the point of view of the evidence, we have the 146 kings between the Swayambhu Manu, whom we consider will be considered the first ruler, to Chandragupt I, and so that 146 is clearly closer to the 153 that Greeks had in mind, or have given us this information. So clearly, again, we have evidence in favor of Sandrokottos being Chandragupt I. And again, if we go to the traditional Indian history, and I had briefly mentioned it, is that in the Puranas, we have got the timing between the coronation of Parikshit, that is soon after Mahabharata war, and Mahapadmanand. And that time is given as 1015, 1050, or 1500 years. So there is some variation, but obviously if you analyze it properly, then you will know that the 1500 year seems to be the right number. And as Dr. Sedna has given this information, that and you can also go to the Puranas to check it, that they allocate 1000 years to the dynasty of Brihadrath, 138 years to Pradyot, and 362 years to Shishunag, and you add them up, and that comes to 1500 years. So the Indian evidence is that between Parikshit to Mahapadmanand, there were 1500 years. And if you count from that, 3138 BCE as the Mahabharata war, you get about 1638 BCE for the coronation of Mahapadmanand, and you take another 100 years, for their rule according to the Puranas. And you'll see that according to our tradition, Chandragupt Maurya started his rule in 1538 BCE. So obviously, according to Indian tradition, Chandragupt Maurya was not the contemporary of Alexander the Great. And this is the final piece of evidence: is the number of empires that the Greeks have talked about. And we know that if Chandragupt Maurya was Alexander's contemporary, then his predecessor, the last Nanda emperor, was ruling over North India when Alexander attacked Porus. And according to the Puranas, the Nandas were the sole monarchs of their time. And here is a quote by Parjitar. He done a great work in compiling information from the Puranas and give that information in this book, the Purana text of the dynasties of Kali age. So if you want to get information about what the Puranas say about our rulers, this book is a good source, and then you can go to the original sources to check it, of course. And he says that a son of Mahanandin by a Sudra woman will be born a king Mahapadma, who will exterminate all Kshatriyas. Thereafter, kings will be of Sudra origin. Mahapadma will be sole monarch, bringing all under his sway. So according to our information from our tradition, our books, the whole of North India was under the control of Mahapadma. So it was a single empire. But what do the Greeks say? The Greeks are not saying it was a single empire. So next came the Ganges, the largest river in all India, the further bank of which was inhabited by two nations, Kangaridai and Prasai. So they are clearly saying that there are two nations. There is not a single empire. So again, we have information that does not match. So in conclusion, based upon all the examination of the evidence that I have shown here from all the various sources, we can find that there is no clinching evidence in favor of the identification of Sandrokottos of the Greek accounts with Chandragupt Maurya. In fact, the evidence is more tilted towards the identification of Sandrokottos of the Greek accounts with Chandragupt I, the founder of Imperial Gupta dynasty. So basically, then so we can see that the first seat anchor, the evidence is there's no clinching evidence. So and then that means that all of this then falls onto the second seat anchor of Indian history, which is the identification of Devanam Priyadarshi of major rock edicts with Ashok Maurya. And this was proposed in 1838 by James Prinsep. I talked about this in my earlier talks also. And the evidence based upon which this identification is made is the 13th rock edict of Devanam Priyadarshi. And this one says, and here I have given a translation by Hulse. This is in the book Corpus Inscription Indicarum. So that is like multiple volumes, which has got a compilation of inscriptions by different rulers of ancient India. And he says, and this conquest had been won repeatedly by Devanam Priya, even as far as the distance of 600 yojanas, where the young Yon king named Antioch is ruling. So at that time, the Antioch is ruling, who is identified with Antiochus. And beyond this Antioch, there are four kings: Turmaya, Antikini, Maka, and Alexander. So these are the four. So five Greek kings, main one being Antioch, and four others are mentioned by this Devanam Priya. And the Indian historians have identified all of them, and they say that it was in 258 BCE when all of these rulers were ruling, and that's when Ashok Maurya, Devanam Priyadarshi, identified as Ashok Maurya, had this inscription written. So this is the most important piece of evidence based upon which all of the ancient Indian history has been constructed. So it is this evidence that we are going to examine in detail and see whether there is any clinching evidence for Devanam Priyadarshi being Ashok Maurya. So was Devanam Priyadarshi of major rock edicts really Ashok Maurya? Is it possible that Devanam Priyadarshi of major rock edicts was another emperor, not Ashok Maurya? And if it was not Ashok Maurya, then who was he? We will take a deeper look at the evidence in the next presentation to be continued. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you, Aditya ji. Thank you, Dr. Mahendra Thakur for organizing these talks, and thanks to the Sattology team for giving me this opportunity to present my views to all of you. These are my contacts. Thank you very much, Aditi, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. One question I have, and you have already answered it actually in the presentation, but just to recap, is that, and you have to tell me because you have done research, so you have to tell me your views, that how the Greek mythology, which is a mythology by the Oxford University, is now taken seriously in the Indologists, actually, so-called Indian Indologists, which should be called the Western Indologists, because they are following the Western viewpoint. Why they have taken it so seriously? And they are getting Padma Vibhushan, Padma Shri, I don't know what Padma awards
Hello.
they get.
Yes, yes. Of course. I mean, we have to take the evidence seriously. So, I mean, again, the whole question is what is evidence, right? So, we have to separate the evidence from what is not the evidence. So, in this case, I mean, all the evidence has to be analyzed properly, and that's what I'm trying to do. Is that present all the information that I have found, and I'm trying to analyze this information and presenting to you. So whatever the uh, modern historians have, of course, they have got their interpretation of the evidence. And as a scientist, as I have said earlier, also the data is very important. The most important thing is the preservation of data, conservation of data. So data should not be played with. We present whatever the data is as it is, and then we say what is our interpretation of that data. As long as we do that, we have got a good scholarship. So what I have done is that I have presented what is the evidence that modern historians have in favor of Chandragupt Maurya, and I have shown that that the evidence is not clear cut. There is no clinching evidence, and this is has to be a dialogue. So hopefully, through this talk, it will reach the modern historians, and there will be hopefully deliberations about it, and the truth will finally come out. Hopefully.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajaram Mohan Roy, and thank you for all the viewers for watching it. Do comment on the video, let us know your feedback, and also share it widely. And we don't, we depend on you to share the videos. And I'm sure that many people watch this video and many other videos on similar lines on this channel, which can actually debunk the unscientific Western assertions on Indiology. Thank you so much. Namaste. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Aditji. Namaskar.